we declare our servitude to Nagrasak. For him we pledge our undying allegiance, and the blood of our kin. We will be his blade to thrust against the protector races, the tide to overcome the walls of the West. We serve the Master in life and death, to avenge the betrayals he suffered, and to extinguish the candles of hope, once and for all. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel and to the world of Aphalas. What you just witnessed and listened to was the Daralothir Enekir, the pledge of servitude done by the Dark Elves when they bent the knee to Nagrasak. The Dark Elves, the Elves of Stiothar, the Bane of Shah, so many other names that go by. They have a long history. Like the Protector races, though, they arose in the same year as the rest of them, and if I just go back a little bit, I actually have the timeline up this time I remembered. It is... No. The emergence of the first people at 100 AE. AE in this case meaning after emergence. The Elves, as you know from the Elven lore video, which I will be linking into this one as it's very prevalent, they arose on Shah and Galakaros. I'm sorry about the sirens. Right. The Dark Elves specifically, and I wasn't initially going to do this, but let me just try and bring up this other document so I can give you a proper visual showing. Because the Dark Elves consist of probably the biggest mix of elves out of any of their sub-factions or things, because you have elements of, well, you have all surviving beast elves, you have a good proportion of moon elves, and you have some sea elves as well. So if we bring that here, is it going to let me? I should have print screened this really, but tell you what, I'll throw it in on the edit, so hopefully if I've edited it correctly that should just pop up there. And the Dark Elves, who are also known as the Stiorreth, their actual formation was done... The origins of why they became evil and that lie probably more specifically in the Beast Elves, the Stioglin, who were effectively chaotic from their very first emergence over on Galakaros. They... Obviously, if you've seen the Elven video, if not, spoilers, please check that one out before watching this one. They were the chief force that destroyed their Stone Elf brethren, the Stioglin, initially destroying the original realm of Haraketh in the process. But in doing that, there was a final sacrifice that the Stone Elves made, and it actually involved one creature that so far in the lore videos I really haven't mentioned that much, and that is the Starlings. Starlings in Aphalas function in an interesting way where they are almost entirely bound to a prophecy. And what happened was, when the Stone Elves got everyone else to flee, the trolls, the other forces that were aiding them, the Starlings came in and effectively launched such a forceful attack in one of their giant murmurations that, in Aphalas' case, forms them into a giant version of the Starlings, that it not only wiped out the remaining Stone Elves, it systematically just crippled the Beast Elves and their allies to such an extent that they would no longer be a threat for many years to come, and that, quite frankly, they could put up no sizable resistance if anyone tried to attack Gallicaros. And this is where these things get a bit interesting, because that whole conflict with the Stone Elves led into all of this, because you had elements of the 6 colonies of the Sea Elves in there as well, and 2 of those colonies, which, unlike the others, are currently still unnamed, joined the exiled Beast Elves, or not exiled, remnant Beast Elves, and they crossed over to Shah after several years of recovery, and what would eventually become Rake was actually their first. It was their first colony, and then the other one was elsewhere. I will tell you the truth, I haven't actually quite decided where that one is yet, but Rake was the first. And the Moon Elves, who were positioned further to the north around the sort of Stiorreth and Horn of Stiorreth area, they were already having pretty much fracturing that was going on in the realm of Erelin, the home of the Moon Elves, but that eventually led into the breaking of their people into the Shields of the Phoenix and the Worshippers of the Dragon, effectively those who sided with Galeria and those who sided with Sinetnia. And whilst the Shields of the Phoenix would actually end up fleeing and forming the Erelin, the Wood Elves, the Worshippers of the Dragon then met with the Stiorreth, who these remnant Sea Elves and Beast Elves were now naming themselves, and together they formed the realm of Stiothar. So you have a combination of 3 different Elven sub-factions, and also 2 of them never knew the other. Like, that's one of the key things here, and I know on the Rovlaror videos that was a similar mentality where the Zersians, who barely any of the Destinal humans had any interaction with, came down and helped form Rovlaror. Now it's the same here. These remnant Dark Elves blended with these already mainland Shah Elves and formed what would become the realm of Stiothar. And at this point, they were fairly rogue. No one really knew what to make of them, because the Beast Elves had been manipulated and everything and were chaotic anyway. The Sea Elves, at this point, no one knew what to make of them, especially since most of them had gone off to Archiferous at this point. And the Moon Elves were fractured between the 2, so there was despising there, and they could see Nagrasak's influence beginning to weigh on them, but they weren't sure what was going to be made of these ones. But it wasn't too long after that that the Daralathir Enakir was pledged, and that was pretty much it. The Dark Elves declared themselves as Nagrasak's chief servants, effectively, and at this point they were, because Nagrasak had his demons and all of that, but at this point he did not have the ogres on his side. He did not have any influence over the ogre men. The desert dwarfs were centuries away from existing, if not thousands of years. So it was Nagrasak and the Dark Elves, and yeah, the Dark Elves immediately started making their presence known by assailing being tasked effectively with assailing the Ajati, because whilst, and I'm fact checking myself here, I'm just ensuring that I don't fudge this up and end up with getting it the wrong way around. I'm gonna have to find this the other way. Okay, well... Okay, I haven't actually specifically noted it, but I know where it comes out. It comes out after the... or as a consequence of the Second Demon War, effectively. And... at this point, the Ajati already had Kala's tenure, they had already got that established and everything. So they were already on Shah, and the Dark Elves and the Ajati from then on started the journey of basically becoming the most hated enemies of one another in pretty much all of Aphalas. The Ajati despised the Dark Elves and fought fiercely, and the Dark Elves even developed a section of their military that was specifically skilled at hunting Ajati. And yeah, the amount of conflicts that would happen between those two throughout all of Aphalas is fairly major. And then after the severing of Arasin, eventually the dwarfs make it over there as well to the realm of Alaros, and then suddenly it's, well, then it's almost more like a balancing act, and the ogres are stuck in that situation as well. So, but the Dark Elves and the Ajati were the ones on Shah who had been fighting for the longest, effectively. And the actual realm implements itself into a lot of different factors and everything. The Dark Elves, like anyone else, or like any of the other factions, nations, whatever you want to call them, they assisted in fighting Sinevia during the Crisis of Galakaros, and by that I mean Sinevia launched 3 assaults on Rake and almost wiped out their entire royal family. So yes, the Dark Elves were understandably wanting revenge, to put it nicely. And the Dark Elves participated in a lot of different things. Their actual people, per se, were a mixture of the influences that they came from, and these mixtures actually made them a very interesting and almost quite unique threat, where they had a heavy cavalry focus from their heritage to the Beast Elves, and having worked with them, or not worked with them, but developed from them. But then you've also got the influence of the Sea Elves, which allow for the seafaring, and then to have, again, not at the same class as the likes of the Ogres, because the Ogres had the best ships in all of Aphalas, but their ships were still up to a very good standard and could easily overpower human ships from a lot of places. And then they also just had rank upon rank of decent infantry and skilled bladesmen, so they had elements in their military from all 3. And there are a lot of notable Dark Elves to go through. I'm not going to mention the ones at the books, obviously, because spoilers, but there is also Sorlun, and I will make a note to actually put these maybe in a box in the bottom to type them. I think that's going to help. And Sorlun is, well, he was actually the second Kunroke, and he was a former Beast Elf. He was a Beast Elf turned Dark Elf, and for those of you wondering, the actual first Kunroke who served Nagrasak, the role that eventually Tonrith would take, was Inaril, a Moon Elf who formed the Worshippers of the Dragon. So Sorlun was a direct successor from him, and I will note that not many of these characters have that much lore yet, so they're getting brief oversights here. But he, being a Beast Elf, he would have been expert with all sorts of creatures, everything from simple horses to the Boygons, potentially. He was, and like all Beast Elves probably, he participated in the fighting of the Stone Elves, so he was an experienced warrior. and yes, I will wait and see what I write about him. But throughout all of their time, there are multiple other characters who I could list through, but none of them have lore yet, so I'm not going to worry about that. But where are you? There's the timeline. The Dark Elves' the first major note of the Dark Elves is actually quite interesting, and it kind of puts it into perspective of the course that they were on anyway with everything, and it happens in 128 AE, and I will just bear in mind that the Second Demon War happens in 195 AE, the thing that leads into the severing of Arisen. And the whole factor why this is the most notable part of them is before the Dark Elves even existed, this was just the Galakaros Elves, who ended up siding with the goblins, ogres, and half-ogres in defending Nagrasak when the father attempted to banish them. So their first major conflict, their first major note, and they were already siding with Nagrasak. And the interesting part is, obviously Nagrasak did not create them. He did create the goblins, ogres, and half-ogres, but he did not create the elves. And that was a battle that they did lose, but the father, like he did with the ogres and that, he did not seek to banish them or anything, especially since there were elves who also fought on his side, the Erethren, the ones who became the Moon Elves. So, technically the Dark Elves fought on both sides of that, or their ancestors did. But it's sort of bugging me now, because I cannot remember where this is now. Just gonna have to find it. Yes, it is notable that I know this is not actually to do with the Dark Elves specifically, but the actual civil war that happens in Galakaros between the Stone Elves and the Beast Elves is also known as the Doom of Stiothar, and I might start referring to it as that to just clear things up a little bit. But yeah, I can't find it, so I'm not going to try to burden around trying to find specifically where I wrote it down. But the Dark Elves never betrayed Nagrasak. Pretty much they fight with him throughout all conflicts and against any foe. The other notable thing, though, is that after the development of humans, effectively, the Dark Elves actually also started focusing around the Isle of Tartak of the Kingdom of Talamarith, and the plan always was that if they did that, any effort to aid the Ajati and eventually Forest Wars that Destiny will take could be prevented by them if it was coming from the east. But it's also the case that they could use it as a staging point to invade mainland Destiny or Arisen. So it was an interception point that could be effectively beneficial at cutting off the Ajati being able to support each other despite their ability to fly. And the Dark Elves The other interesting thing, though, is that the Dark Elves had probably one of the most confrontational attitudes towards even their own allies. Like the leaders of the Dark Elves never trusted the ogres of Sarakarth because difference of view. The ogres fought hard and ended up losing against Nagrasak and at the time against Dark Elves as well. And the Dark Elves had pledged servitude to Nagrasak whilst the ogres only became servants of him because he spared them because he saw their potential. So it became a mentality of a rivalry between the two, and it was why Nagrasak never really, until the major conflict or grand plans, he tried to keep them on separate tasks. He never really wanted them working together because he was concerned about them just turning their blades on one another. And just going into their details and things, during Tonruf's war, the Dark Elves completely overwhelmed Talamarith at Tartak, and it takes years and a combination of the Temple Guard, Cafaltir, and Talamarith, as well as some sections of Wood Elves, to actually take the Isle back. And that is a brutal campaign. But that is also really their worth of note, because in doing that, they also weaken their own mainland, and the way that Tonruf's war actually ends up is actually the Forest Dwarves and the Ajati overpowering the Dark Elves, and they retake Kalaranos, they push them almost completely out of Rainith, and then just place the last 3 territories under a massive watch. And the Dark Elves get really caught out by that, and get pinned down effectively. And then the Years of Sorrow, they really don't do too much aside from pretty much just try to bolster their ranks as best as they can and everything. And then in Galakaros, obviously another threat comes to light. And it is also notable that in the little incursion that Yitzir, Jolkorn, and others launched into Galakaros to, well, at first they believed it was to try and assassinate Sinetvia, but it turned out to be Yitzir's plan to just blind Sinetvia and her servants of the fire pits. And it is notable that Sakarth, the current, or at the time, who was the king of Rake, or the Lord of Rake, it was his ships that allowed them to transport over, so he did directly help in that effort. And it's one of the most notable things about him specifically, is that he showed a willingness to actually work with the Protector races to face off against a greater threat than a lot of his predecessors or followers or successors would have. And his daughter might be one of the only exceptions to that. But that's more because she had to face a lot of internal strife. And then the Dark Elves drop off the radar. Again, they aid in the fighting of Galakaros and all that, but then it's just a time of recovery for pretty much all of Aphalas. Or these areas that were affected by Galakaros. But the Dark Elves were then spotted by the Dwarves at sending riders, and I've got the camera in the way, but sending riders from their own territory to the Pyramid of the Deceased up there just below the Rising Dunes. And it was spotted by the Dwarves who were currently holding the ruins of Darrell Lothir. And it raised a great deal of suspicion. And that suspicion is what leads Theodan down the road of basically being corrupted by Tonruf and becoming the first desert dwarf and effectively spelling the end of the forest dwarven realm. And that was all kind of spurred on by the raised suspicion of Dark Elf riders going back and forth to the pyramid under no seeming circumstance, but it was worrying people. It was worrying the forest dwarves and the Ajati to the point where they started mobilizing in preparation for a Dark Elf attack. And then in the subsequent war of elves and dwarves, the Dark Elves play a significant factor in aiding the desert dwarves, and they launched 3 armies, I believe it is, into the forests of Adala, whilst also engaging another force to keep the Ajati at bay. But when the Wood Elves come in, it goes all kinds of chaotic, but they do actually end up winning it. And like Nagrasag and like the Desert Dwarves, they each take a portion. Like the Dark Elves completely take over Adala after the Forest Dwarves get beaten. They take full control of the forest and its southern land. Then when it comes to the actual 3 key territories of the dwarves in there, the capital of Aralakir, Kelatoth and Saranith, it gets divided into 3. The Dark Elves take the capital, the Desert Dwarves take Kelatoth, and the Demons take Saranith. So the 3 tiny territories that are kind of obscured by basically the trees, they get divided. They get partitioned, basically, by the forces of Shah. And the other thing that's very much worth a note is actually up in Arisen, in the origins of the Ice Elves. Because the Ice Elves were a company of Dark Elves initially that Nagrasag had sent forward to try and establish a base, try to conduct raids, because this predates the Flame Tribe of Bannerlin. And they ventured into the north. They actually ventured towards the ruins of Kenareth, the Kirindrek, old settlement in the ice, where they discovered a massive battle had basically been undertaken, and in the middle of that entire battle was a dead child of the Wyverns. No one knows how it got there, I think, as I've reiterated before, but the Dark Elves got too close to it, and before they realised it was whatever had killed it had some sort of corruptive magic tied to Senevia, and it basically took them and overwhelmed them, and those it did not kill, it turned into the Ice Elves. And they just became full-blown servants of Senevia's will, or what they thought was her will. So, the Dark Elves they're an interesting antagonist, because in terms of most stories, the vast majority of their stuff and events is largely fixated around fighting the dwarves or the Ajati, unless you go back to pre-Dark Elf time, aside from some squabbles with the ogres and humans. But they also hold out a lot of influence in setting things in motion, and most of the time it's been completely inadvertently, which is quite amusing, really. They became the first Ice Elves and created this giant, massive threat to Arisen that became the very reason why the Kirindrek formed the barrier, the Arisen the A-Gate barrier around their entire isle. They had seafaring capabilities, which means they engaged with all sorts of different fleets. They fought off pirates at points. They had hunters designed on specific tasks, like hunting the Ajati or going elsewhere. They had direct engagements with Fori, even one of the Shadow Dance characters, and because Fori was a wood elf who, and they'll get their own video at some point, but they will know. Fori was a trained wood elf assassin, and her assassins caused so much damage to Nagrasak's efforts. And eventually, though, they were led into a trap, and it was a trap caused by the Dark Elves. And about 2/3 of their people, these assassins, were killed in the ambush. Others were captured. Fori was one of the few who escaped. And this trap and failure would haunt her for a very long time. In terms of, if you were to say in terms of power ranking and all of that, the Dark Elves, because of, it is also notable that they don't necessarily have that much magic to their name. They've had the occasional enchanter, but because they pledged their servitude to Nagrasak so early on, obviously the Dracons, who hold over most of the magic training capabilities unless you went to the Kirin Drake, who also were at this stance, pretty much just shut the Dark Elves out because they pledged their servitude so early on to Nagrasak. And they proved great armies and everything. They were incredibly skilled warriors. I think one of the key ways to compare it is that you have Lord of the Rings, where Sauron has his orcs, but then he's got his evil men who he purposely keeps in reserve as his elite forces, especially the Easterlings. That's essentially what the Dark Elves are for most of Nagrasak's rule. Like, the demons are his forces, the ogres are okay as like shock, but the Dark Elves are the true elite. And it's why most encounters with the human forces, when it's been a direct encounter with no intervention from anyone else, has normally ended badly for the humans, because the Dark Elves are just more skilled and better equipped, better trained. It's how, because Talamari did put up resistance on the Isle of Tartak, but they just got annihilated, pretty much, the resistance they had. And Talamaris are not a poorly equipped kingdom, or by any means, especially the Isle. But yeah, some of the most notable Dark Elves are Zakarth and his daughter Selkin. If you've seen which video would it have been? One of the videos on Galakaros I mentioned about his son, who would have been his heir, getting killed, basically by a turncloak ogre. And that also, on top of everything else, the relationships get strained by things like that as well. And it's Nagrasak's forces in general were as good as he was, as powerful as he was, rather, and as powerful as the forces under him were. It doesn't mean that they got along, and it helps in a lot of cases that they are about a continent away from each other. But the Dark Elves are arguably also Nagrasak's most trusted forces, because those ones that betrayed him and became the Ice Elves, they, like, obviously if he heard about this, and that's the thing, like, it took years for Nagrasak for word to reach back to Shah over what had happened to them. It took years because the Ice Elves went into hiding and started building up their forces. So for years and years, everyone just assumed that that Dark Elf company had just vanished. Maybe it had been taken out by steppe raiders or something else, or the Fayoun or anything. But some of the most notable areas of the actual realm of Stiothar just checking on it now. Rake is obviously one of the key ones. The Horn of Stiorreth is also another. It has been the site of multiple battles. It has been some of the most key cases. There's been multiple duels on it. So it is a very prominent area for them. And then looking at their coastline, Ralathpar is where a lot of their riders train, where their cavalry trains. So if you had to divide it up, Ralathpar was probably the area where the most beast elves probably inhabited. And then at one point they did have full control over Rhaenith, but the Ajati were able to claw some of it back. And it is notable that for quite a few times East Rhaenith and Caloranos are not owned by either side. They are almost a no man's land between the two. But yeah. Hello. Hello.
Do you know about Sunday yet?
I am probably going to feed him.
Okay, cool. What do you expect you to do then?
Yeah.
Alright, thank you.
Okay.
Alright, catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Sorry about that. Sorting out birthday plans. Anyway, and all of that is going to get cut out. Right. Ralathpar, as I noted, is the place where most of their cavalry train. And then Western Rhaenith is actually another specific part, and this is a part that I have not mentioned. The Dark Elves are one of the very few people in all of Aphalas to be true masters of the chariots. And the chariots were built and developed in Rhaenith. It was the right terrain for them, it helped them, and these chariots, whilst these chariots were obviously not as great against the forces like the Ajati, when they were fighting the forest dwarfs in the open, or even the ogres or humans, they were devastating. And it's one of those things that probably infuriated the Dark Elves the most, in the fact that they developed all these weapons and the Ajati could still just avoid them just because of their capability of flight. But the Ajati hunters specifically were at first specifically trained to be those in combat who specifically targeted the Ajati who were in flight. And then throughout the years, throughout the time, they became more sadistic and they started decorating their armour in the Ajati feathers that they had taken from the corpses they had slain. Sort of like a kill counter in some cases, and yeah, it became something that obviously infuriated the Ajati to such a point where anytime the Ajati saw one of these creatures, yes, there would be a bit element of fear, but the fear would quickly get placated by just a battle rage. And yeah, it is, out of all the rivalries on Aphalas, out of all the forces that have fought back and forth, the trolls and the ogres, the Ajati, the Dark Elves, demons and the Protector races, and all of these things, this is probably one of the worst in terms of how bloody it all ended up being. And it is their capability of being able to merge the three different peoples into one habitable area and have it work as well as it did and be so effective is both a testament to how much servitude they had for Nagrasak and also their potential of being able to just work together. And there is going to be a whole lot more lore on them like everyone else. But that is effectively it for now, because I feel like I'm about to just start rambling about random Aphalas stuff, so I'm going to stop the video here. And there will be several edits in and everything, but I am going to do one more thing though, and that is if I can access the document, I am going to list to you the Dark Elves that are already been confirmed and have more to be done about them, aside from Sirkarth and his daughter Selquin. So you have Lorenin, a Dark Elf male, Norris, another Dark Elf male, Ilani, another Dark Elf male, Zeriquin, a female Dark Elf, and Kinalith, another male. So you have them on top of the Conrogue, on top of more development of the ones from the books. So you have a lot of Dark Elf characters. I hadn't actually checked that document in a while, and yeah, there's a lot of characters to cover and develop. So yes, for now, that is all. I apologise that it was a bit dysfunctional and a bit rambling. I honestly went into this thinking I had done more for them than I had, or no, that's not really true. I wasn't anticipating how much of what I was going to say would have been spoilers for the books, so I tried desperately to avoid even mentioning them. But yeah, the Dark Elves they're a favourite of mine because of the way I did them. Like, even before I made them the good seafarers, I always wanted their mentality to be very professional army and very good cavalry. And because at first when I was developing Aphalas, when it came to the Elves, who were always a bit of a hesitant, they took a while for me to decide whether I was going to implement them or not. It was the Wood Elves and the Dark Elves. Like the Moon Elves, the Beast Elves, the Stone Elves, the Ice Elves, the Sea Elves, I think I said twice there, they had nothing more. But it is notable that there is one story that I'm planning to do that is going to involve Galakaros again, but it's the legacy of what happened with the Starlings. Because there was a prophecy, and I will also state that the Dark Elves are not the only people who are going to attend this. It's going to be an interesting bit of the lore. But it is also something that if they had succeeded in doing it, not only could they have probably prevented Sinepia being able to reclaim Galakaros, because the key thing is she had her agents and herself in a weakened state. So Dark Elves, I mean, depending on who their leader was, their leader may have just tried to hold Galakaros on their own, or they may have been smart enough to call out for help from the likes of Galerion. But they could have taken over Galakaros with this power and pretty much had full concentration over that waterway between the two, and would have then been an incredibly credible threat to not only Destiny, but also the Twin Isles, and potentially even on Archiveris. But then the thing is that unlike a lot of the other forces, you're very unlikely to ever find a Dark Elf on Archiveris because of the lack of magic. Because they don't have the abilities of the Ruby magic and everything. And I mean, Nagrasak specifically picked certain people that he did give magical imbuement to, but Sinepia, who, and I will just confirm this in the lore right now, Sinepia at her height is way more powerful than Nagrasak at his height. And she was only ever able to give out her magic, her corruptive, twisted magic, to a certain amount of people, and I'm not counting the Ice Elves there, because she did not directly do that. But Nagrasak was weaker than her, still powerful obviously as one of the creators, but he was weaker. So he was only ever able to pass out his magic to certain people, hence why the Kunroks were so important. and why there was only ever one of them at a time. Because the other part of all of this is in so much of this, so much of the lore that happens throughout all of this time. Nagrasak is in banishment, and some people think he's just dead. Like, he is not physically there. So it's influential, so he cannot dedicate all his power to all of this. But it is also notable that there was something else that happened, and that was Tonreef. When Tonreef became the Conroke, one of his first objectives was actually to stop a couple of demon rebellions that were going on within Nagrasak's territory in his absence. And whilst he had other half ogres with him, he needed to bolster his ranks. The ogres didn't want anything to do with him, so he ended up having to lean on the Dark Elves for support. So you had Tonreef leading a force of half ogres and Dark Elves against demons. And that was Tonreef's effectively first battles. So, if you really had to put it into context of all of this, and this is sort of drifting away from the Dark Elves a little bit, I mentioned Tonreef a lot in the lore because a lot of the lore I've done already covers him. But it's also the case that if you had a chessboard, he's almost like the queen. He's one of the most significantly strong forces on the board. But yes, the Dark Elf. That is the Dark Elf episode done. I will be editing more in, and unlike the Demon episode, I am going to manage the volume. The thing that went wrong with the Demon one was I had the music on OBS too loud. Not doing it this time, and I think from now on when it comes to these lore videos, I know on stream it might be a bit more dulling, but I am going to edit the music in afterwards so I can balance the volume better, because I find it difficult to do on here. And it's going to sound really daft, but because of my dyspraxia, I've also got noise sensitivity, so I can't always tell the intensity of the two things combined. So I find it easier to do on open shot. It's ironically one of the only things I find easier to do on open shot. For now, that is all. Thank you all very much for watching, and I think, well, I was going to say that the lore videos were going to be alternating between the Kingdoms ones and the Evil ones, but truth be told, the videos are going to come out a bit sporadically. Lore-wise, it's going to be covering whatever I can really think of at the time and all of that. So that's why there is no schedule for these things. Like this week also, I've been I got quite a bit behind, so I've ended up exporting and also uploading a video already today, as well as a new podcast episode in Spotify. Yes, please do check them out. But thank you all very much for watching. Please do check out the links in the description. Please do share. And if you've got any tips on how I can improve my videos or with the lore or anything like that, please do so. And also, please do remember that if you would like to have a character in Aphalas' lore that is going to be entirely canon to the lore and will feature in stories and all of that, sign up for membership on the Ko-fi page, because it's the money raised from that, it supports me, it goes towards what I'm doing with all of this, it develops it, and you get to have a direct hand in having a character in the world of my fantasy trilogy and future works and all of these other things. So please do have a glance at that if you're interested, because I will tell you the truth. I love this world, and there's room for thousands of characters in it, and I've already got a boatload of my own that I need to sort through and develop, so thank you very much, on top of all the other books as well. Please do comment, like, and subscribe, and until next time, welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Fellow Mind books. Cheerio.